But Jeff, when you say that you saw it was either change or suicide, was there something that you felt, you did's probably the wrong word, but was there like a decision made? Was there something, it must have impacted you somehow inside? Because that's a very dramatic place to get to.
Well, I mean, the point
as a
is,
human being.
I was too afraid to kill myself, you know.
So you had no
choice.
Really.
I had no option. I had no option.
Yeah.
It's a terrible situation to be in.
Yeah.
But, you know, in hindsight, thank God it happened, you know, thank God.
And then when you reached that point, did something significant happen fairly quickly, or was it another period of time, or...?
Well, you know, it reached a critical point of misery, and then I got physically quite ill as well. I got glandular fever, quite a serious case of it. And
Okay.
I'll tell you how it happened. You know, one night I just I collapsed in my bathroom, and I'd been vomiting blood just out of nowhere. And I collapsed on the floor, passed out, woke up. I don't know how much longer later, in a pool of my own blood. And I tried to move, and I found out I was paralysed. And it was like, you know, I'm going to die. That's it. And it was something about that, I think. It was something about that, the sense of how precious this life is and how quickly it can be wiped out, you know. Yeah. Something about that stuck with me.
Yeah.
And a few days later, you know, I was lying in hospital, I was feeling better, you know, they were treating me. And I think it was something about that experience of how, you know, it's like my whole life I had never realised how precious it was to actually be alive. I'd just taken it for granted, you know, that the simplicity of the fact that I'm alive at all was just ignored, you know, in my search to be someone, in my misery. It was like, so it was something about that experience that, you know, it's like that taste of death and how close it was and how easily all this can fall away. It's like something about the impermanence of what we take to be our lives. Because this illness, it came out of nowhere. It just came out of nowhere. And that was, at the time, that was terrifying. You know, how easily it can be taken away. And, and a few days later, I was lying in my hospital bed, and, you know, my whole life I had been a committed atheist. You know, the word spirituality, it meant nothing to me. You know, it meant witches and goblins and ghouls or something. I didn't know, you know, that's what the word spirituality meant. Religions were, you know, it was all ridiculous to me. And for the first time in my life, you know, I remember there was a Bible by the side of my bed, and for some reason I just found myself picking it up and looking through it and reading the words of Jesus. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't just a bunch of words, it wasn't just some man-made nonsense, you know. There was something in it. There was a resonance there was something about eternal life, something about the preciousness of this, something about something beyond us. I didn't know at the time. I didn't know. But the point is, there was no choice in that. And that's where it all began. That's where the seeking began. It was to find this, whatever it was.
Right.
This resonance, but to find it out there.
And when you say the seeking began, what form did it take then?
Well, it was for me, it was very much... I mean, I've been a seeker my whole life. You know, the mind is a seeker, you know. But at that point, it was when my spiritual seeking really began. And, you know, I started off just by... I found myself doing this. There was no choice in it. You know, once that spark had been lit, there was no way of going back, you know. And I moved back to Manchester with my parents, and I shut myself off in my room for about a year. And it started off with...
well, that's quite extreme in itself, almost shutting yourself off for a year.
I was a very extreme person,
yeah.
Well, you know, I was blessed or cursed, I don't know, you know, with a very strong intellect. I was very clever. So once I got my hands on something, I had to tear it apart, you know, I had to go right into it. That was my nature. So once that fire began, it was, you know, it was very, very intense. It was like a fire that started to burn, and, you know, I couldn't put it out. And I started off with very basic books on Buddhism, Christianity, on books on meditation, very basic stuff, and then books on meditation, on self-inquiry. I mean everything, just everything, and I mean everything. You know, I tried everything. And
when you say you tried it, you would like do a certain meditation technique for a time, a certain religion for a time,
yeah. And there were, I started to have all sorts of spiritual experiences. You know, glimpses of oneness, falling away of the self, just intense compassion, breaking down, crying for hours at the beauty of the world, And there were times of great despair as well, seeing the impermanence of everything, seeing that I wasn't there, seeing that, in a sense, the whole thing was futile. So it was it was a very tumultuous time, it was a very dramatic time, and there was old beliefs started to fall away that I'd had for lifetimes, when I started to see that I wasn't who I thought I was.
And did you feel basically positive about what was happening, or did it scare you? Or?
Well, I can't say I felt positive about it. It wasn't particularly pleasant, actually. It was at the start, it was all very exciting, and it actually got quite nasty towards the end because the seeking became so intense. But also, I knew I couldn't give it up. You see, I knew I couldn't give it up.
Yeah.
I knew that.
So when you say it got intense, you would do more extreme things like meditate for longer, or?
It was just in a sense of how much I'd shut myself off from basic, ordinary life, an ordinary human
like a
relationship.
ground in a way.
Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, I don't remember a lot about those times because so much happened and so much fell away, and I went through all sorts of state. I became a militant vegan at one point. I was just exploring exploring everything, looking for the answers, because I realised the answers couldn't be found in the way I'd been living my life, and they couldn't be found in having a nice job and finding a nice girl to marry, or it couldn't be found in the ways that I thought it could be found. It was a clear seeing of that, and it did reach a point of such intensity. I became, my whole identity was now I was a spiritual seeker. That was me. So I changed my old identity, for a new identity.
Yeah.
What I couldn't see then, it was just as much of an identity as ever. The spiritual seeker. I'm the spiritual seeker. It's still an identity. It's still something to cling to.
But it had opened your world.
Yeah.
Somehow, given you new possible horizons. I say you as an individual, but there was a movement there somehow.
Yeah, it had opened so much up, and yet there was still very much the sense of being an individual who was looking for something.
I understand that.
That was still there, very much.
Yeah.
Probably heavier than ever, actually. At least I wasn't so miserable anymore. But I was kind of miserable in a different way because I hadn't reached enlightenment yet. I hadn't awakened yet.
You were very driven.
Very.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why, people who come to my meetings these days, and they ask me questions, like, I've asked all these questions already. I've done everything. I've done this seeking thing. I asked every question known to man. I really did. And, I think the point is I never found the answers. Well, I did. I found answers, and then the seeking would start again. There seemed to be this incessant movement into a future. It was this constant looking for something that I thought I'd lost, and I see it so clearly now. As long as there was a person there looking for awakening, there was a separate person there. And that's what I couldn't seem to shake off. And however much I tried, I couldn't get rid of me. I couldn't get rid of the separate me. And at one point, it was even seen that I couldn't awaken. So then the focus became, I have to get rid of me. I have to get rid of the self. And what I couldn't see then, was that it was a self trying to get rid of a self.
That's right, yeah.
These vicious circles of thought, and it got more and more subtle, actually. It got more and more subtle. The seeking went on in more and more subtle ways. As the seeking was seen through in that way, it carried on. It's like the mind didn't want to give up. It didn't want to give up, And it didn't want to give up this idea that one day I'll awaken, And all I can say is that somehow in the midst of that, it all fell away. But it certainly wasn't something that I did. Because in all my effort to do that, I was just reinforcing the sense of me. I'm a separate person.
But if you hadn't done it, would it have fallen away? I guess we don't know.
Well, you see, this is the question, isn't it? It's the central question. What was seen so clearly was that it was already here, it was already complete.
Yeah.
The awakening, whatever you want to call it, oneness that I was looking for, was already here. But you see, it wasn't something that I could have. It can't be possessed, it can't be grasped. And it's actually the grasping, the attempt to grasp it,